Hello, everyone. Happy Black Business Month and welcome back to another episode of The Green Agenda. It is already episode 8 of season 6, and I'm just surprised, honestly, by how fast it's going by. For those who don't know me, my name is Kayla Shannon, a proud Spelman alumna and your host. And as you should know, I hope by now, we always like to start by giving a thank you to our sponsors here at the Environmental Defense Fund and the Climate Action Campaign. So for this episode of The Green Agenda, we are going to recognize the contributions and economic impact of Black entrepreneurs and business owners, but most especially our Black farmers, okay? This month, we commemorate Black Business Month with this conversation about the Farm Bill, a massive legislative package that Congress typically renewed every 5 years. It directs national policies related to agriculture, food security, nutrition assistance, and land conservation, covering a lot of land here, figuratively and literally. We'll dig into personal stories and the history of Black farmers in the U.S., the ongoing fight for equal access in the South, and accountability for public officials. Okay, we're covering ground. We are joined tonight with Kelly Adesina, Vice President with BGR Group's Commerce and Infrastructure Practice. She's also the chair of the Board of Directors for the Food Research and Action Center, or FRAC, a member of the Board of Directors for Farm Foundation and CHC, aka Creating Healthier Communities, and a founder of Black Professionals in Food and Agriculture. So look, resume is serious.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm very excited about this. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's episode. Before we get started, I always like to ask guests, first and foremost, tell me about like your hero origin story. So what brought you here? What really sparked your interest in the area of agriculture? And then how did you land where you are right now today as a professional?
Yeah, so before I do any of that, first,
please,
thank you so much for having me here today. This is going to be a really interesting conversation, and I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you. When you talk about my hero story, it's really funny because I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And one of the things you said in the introduction, you said AKA something. I was like, oh my God, I hope my stars
I triggered you. I'm sorry.
I hope my stars don't talk about me. But one of my heroes is she was the former president of my sorority, and she also was one of my former bosses, Congresswoman Marsha L. Fudge. And so prior to coming to D.C., I had the opportunity to meet her while I was in law school, right after I pledged Delta. And so when I had the opportunity to work for her, it was like a full circle moment. And when I got to her office, I was her legislative director. And it was at a time when she was the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. She was the ranking member on the Agriculture and Nutrition Subcommittee. And I'm just like, wow, I get to work for this woman who once led my sorority. And now I get to work for her in this other capacity, you know, similar to me. She's a lawyer by background. She went to the Ohio State University. She did their undergrad there. I went to law school there. And so it was really like a full circle moment, having the opportunity to look up to someone and work with someone, I should say, that I looked up to for such a long time.
That's so cool. And so then after having that inspiration and spending some time working under her, shout out to our She Rose, yes, right? What for you really particularly sparked your personal interest in like, this is where I belong. Like this really actually fits for me and my superpowers.
So funny is I never thought that I'd be working in food and ag issues, right? I am from Newark, New Jersey, affectionately known as Brick City, because of our high rises. It's a very urban area. But one of the things I've come to learn, and one of the things I always say is that, you know, everyone wants access to healthy, nutritious, affordable food. And so, you know, I feel very much in the right spot. So when I started working on food and ag issues, it was because of Fudge. I came into her office during the time of the 2014 Farm Bill conversations, and I was a legislative director. And she's like, okay, you're a lawyer, you're smart, I need you to figure this out. And I'm like, okay, I guess I will.
All right.
I've never worked with these issues before, but okay, I can do this. And so it was a great time because I needed to represent her in her personal office, but I also needed to make sure that I represented the priorities of the Congressional Black Caucus. And so I worked on that farm bill successfully, got a lot of provisions into that bill. And then from there, you know, my career just took off. So I stayed working in food and ag because the other thing is I didn't really see a lot of people that look
That
like
look
us,
like us.
working in this field, right? And so I thought, well, this is actually pretty cool. This can make me, stand out, from others. When you think about Capitol Hill and people working on different issue areas, I wanted to be able to work on an issue that allowed me to, get into different doors. And so I worked in her office for about 3 years. And then I went over to USDA for a year. The last year of the Obama administration, I was a presidential appointee. Yeah, it was great.
I'm jealous of you.
It was great. It was great. I'm not going to lie. So I worked in the Obama administration. I was in the office of the general counsel. And I was the chief of staff to the general counsel. But as I mentioned, I went there the last year of the administration. So I knew that, I needed to find a job. So I went back to the Hill and I worked on the House Agriculture Committee. Because at this point in time, people start looking at me as an expert. And so when the opportunity, came about to work on the 2018 Farm Bill, I was like, okay, let's do this, right? And so I worked on that Farm Bill. I was the chief counsel of the committee. And this time I got to draft provisions that actually were included in the Farm Bill and got passed into law. And so after being there for another 3 years, I was now a solidified food and ag expert.
Yes.
So I eventually left the Hill and then went over to Bayer, where I worked on the crop science as part of the business, not the farmer side. And then I went over to Kraft Heinz. And in both locations, I was a lobbyist for the company. So I was an in-house lobbyist. Whereas now, working for BGR Group, I'm a multi-client lobbyist. So now I represent various companies in the food and ag space.
I love that. And what I'm so excited about in your story is the opportunity, particularly for you to put a foot in the door in some ways, right? So to be clear, there was a foot in the door before your foot in the door, because you already said we've already named the folks who supported you to sit at the table, but also beside that, being able to find a corner, right? Because often where there lacks representation, there lacks reflection in policy, right? And so when Black and brown communities, when low income communities, when folks with certain types of experiences are not represented in rooms and conversations where decisions are being made about issues nationwide, right? There are major blind spots that are left behind. And so I'm so excited just by not only what that means for you and your career, for you to have carved out a space, but also what it means for communities on an ongoing basis to have you as a role model, but then also to have more folks that are able to represent and speak to the diverse experiences of the American people.
And you just dropped the bar. I had to write it down.
Oh,
because I just honestly, because it's true, right? Because I think that, in talking about food and ag policy and just working on Capitol Hill, because I worked on the Hill for almost a decade, or I should say federal government for almost a decade. But when you said, where you lack representation, it lacks also a reflection in policy. So I just really liked how you, combine that and kind of shown the connection, because I think particularly at this point in time and in working in food and ag, you do see that sometimes, right? Where because there's not a representation, whether it be, because of ethnicity, because of gender, because of regional, kind of experiences. I said earlier from the North. So you might have people who are like, why are you working in food and ag issues? Or why are you someone from urban America working in ag issues? I really think that it's important to make sure you have that representation so that it can be reflected in policy. So thank you for just mentioning that, because I'm going to really take that with me.
Please do. And yes, this is very exciting. So for our listeners who may not be familiar with the issue, I'm just so interested. Now is such an interesting time to be talking about farming. Okay. The amount of food on recall right now, it'll make you scared to open your refrigerator. Okay. So now is such an interesting time to be talking about farming. But for those, who maybe live under a rock, or maybe just have not yet drawn the line, the direct line that exists between some of the things that are happening throughout society with food right now and farming, can you please break down what the Farm Bill is in a nutshell, but also what challenges are Black farmers facing today?
Yeah, so I think you gave a really good setup, in the introduction. The Farm Bill is a really massive piece of legislation. It, covers everything ranging from credit, commodity assistance, nutrition to forestry, research and development to specialty crops, right? So it covers a lot of ground. It typically has at least 12 different titles. It covers SNAP funding. It can cover energy. So it's a lot of things in the Farm Bill. Typically, it is renewed every 5 years, but right now we are working off of the 2018 Farm Bill, which means that it should have been, reauthorized in 2023. Here we are in 2026, and it still is unclear whether that bill will get reauthorized this year. In the past, you've had this like symbiotic relationship with the traditional ag community and the nutrition community, because you realize that farming and feeding work hand in hand. And there was at some point a recognition between rural America and the suburban urban America, like, okay, we will support your traditional ag if you support, the things that are most important to us, which typically was nutrition assistance. And unfortunately, we've seen a breakdown in that. Part of it is when the reconciliation bill was passed last year, and for some of your listeners who may be familiar, it was called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The fact that that's the name of an actual bill still just bothers me. But nonetheless, the reconciliation bill that was passed last year, it took money from programs like conservation and SNAP to pay for other priorities like tax relief for, some people might say for the most wealthiest among us. But essentially, when they did that, it took some of the leverage that you would have to get a farm bill done. And so now we're in a situation where we still don't know if we'll get that farm bill reauthorized. So we'll talk more about that, if you want to later on in the conversation. To your point about Black farmers, historically, Black farmers have had a hard go when it comes to retaining land. If you look at 1920, and you look at where we are today, 1920, Black farmers represented 14% of all farmers. Today is around 1.4%.
Wow.
Right? So that's a drastic drop off. A lot of that is due to discrimination. Whether it comes to, loan programs, technical assistance, things of that nature, actual land ownership issues. Back in the day, well, actually still now too, but thinking about back in the day, when it came time to make decisions about credit access and, kind of funding, those decisions were made at the local level, at the county level. Your county level was made up of people who are traditionally in your community. Most Black farms are in the South. The South had higher, rates of discrimination. And so you can see, where I'm going, right? So over time, you had issues where Black farmers weren't able to access that capital. Maybe they did get a loan, but it had higher interest rates or it had stricter repayment rates. If they did have land, they had this issue around heirs property. So with heirs property, typically when, a Black family wanted to leave land to their relatives, they didn't have actual good title to the land. They just passed it down, didn't pass it down in their will. Over time, when you don't have a good title to your land, it makes it susceptible for people to come in and say, oh, wait, that's not your land. You don't have the title. Or, now the relatives have access to it, but it's been broken up in fractional shares. And so it leaves it, to be vulnerable for now. We can't really, do anything. We can't access these disaster programs. We can't access these loan programs because we don't have a deed. We don't have the title. And if we don't have the title, that prevents us from getting the resources that we need. So between, property loss with heirs property and just discriminatory practices, Black farmers have really suffered and their numbers have dwindled to the rate that we see today. So I think at one point in time, you might have had over 190,000, farmers. Now you have about 32,000 farmers in the country. So this is a significant loss in Black farmers.
Yes, and when you think about how it makes so much sense, right? When we think about the history, when we think about how much Black and brown people have generally struggled for access to ownership of anything, if we're going to be honest, right? How cumbersome that process has been, how laborious that process has been. But then even more so when you think about now the current statistics when we talk about who has greatest access to fresh produce, who has the least access, where we have our food deserts, where we have our grocery deserts, right? These things are incredibly reflective of some of the statistics and the history that you talk about in connection. And you think about even what a difference it could make in present societies and in present conversations if there were larger choosing majorities, right? Because even this is something that like perturbs me, right? When we have these conversations about how farmers feel about everything that's going on, right? Because one of the greatest communities that Trump bargained toward during the process of his election was to farmers. And now you look at how greatly farmers have been negatively impacted by so many of his decisions. And now there are some, now let's be clear, there were some farmers who didn't fall for the okie doke. There were quite a few farmers that were like, this doesn't add up. But there are others who maybe trusted or believed in some of those things. And now we're seeing the active fallout of what he meant when he made this one big beautiful bill.
And I think one of the things, this is like an old saying, hopefully I don't butcher it too much, but when others get a cold, Black people get pneumonia, right? And so when you think about the impact, whether it be tariffs or whether it be loss of markets, it is very harmful to farmers, as a whole. We think about a farm bill that hasn't been, reauthorized and, having to do ad hoc disaster assistance. Very problematic. But for a smaller farmer, right? For a Black farmer, for a Hispanic farmer, but for farmers who have less resources, less land, it is even more that impact is felt more acutely, right? Because they may not be able to hedge their losses as best as someone else can, right? As a larger farmer, they may not be able to take some of the risks that another farmer can, or say, okay, I may not be able to afford that fertilizer, but, or maybe that fertilizer might be more expensive, but I'll still buy it. Whereas a small farmer has to make those difficult decisions. Like, I don't know if I can buy that right now. Can I, actually even plant this crop? Do I need to wait for the next season? Like, what does that look like for me? And so I think that, particularly right now, all farmers are, hurting, but, it's definitely different for those smaller farmers. And typically, most of those smaller farmers tend to be Black farmers and brown farmers, too.
So hearing about these concerns that agricultural resources and investments that are often concentrated in parts of the Midwest, right? Even though some of the history of farming falls along in the South, while farmers in the South struggle to access these same opportunities. What does that disparity look like at the ground level, and what are some of the consequences for Black farming communities?
Yeah, I mean, it's just hard. The ground level is harder when you think about a lot of the resources going to your larger row crop farmers. Those larger row crops tend to be corn and soybean. Corn and soybean is grown, in the Midwest, whereas some of the other crops rice and peanuts are grown in the South, but, some of the Black farmers are not, growing those at the same scale. And so, if they're not growing at the same scale, it might be harder for them to get some of that access to that money. The other thing is when you think about some of the documentation that's needed, they may not have that same type of sophistication, that a larger farmer has. And so again, when you are, dealing with these inequities that are already built in, and then you see, resources are being kind of not diverted, but given to one area more so than another, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, everyone else gets a cold. Black folks get pneumonia, right? It's just kind of like it just doubles down on some of the inequities that already exist for Black farmers.
Yeah. And so without all of that in mind, I feel like my first thought then goes to how can we strategically be thoughtful of Black and brown farmers? Like, how can we, like, I am all for strategic, radical action in every area, facet of life, right? Like, how can we be thoughtful when we're grocery shopping?
Yeah.
How can we be thoughtful as we're preparing, preparing food for our family and being thoughtful about where we source food from of those smaller local farmers?
Yeah, I think, honestly, it starts with going to your, local farmer. I mean, I've been in communities where you might see someone on the roadside, or you may go to a farmer's market. Like, I go to a farmer's market in my, area sometimes to get that local honey or something like that. But really pouring into, the local economy makes a difference. I know that sometimes you have certain retailers that will partner with certain companies, like, whether it be Black History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month, they may highlight, certain products. This is a larger farming operation, but the Bridgeforth Farms, I know that they were once highlighted in Target, and they use the Bridgeforth Farms cotton for like a lot of the T-shirts, and they highlight that during Black History Month. So I think it's more about making sure that we as consumers, once we find out about these farmers, supporting them, making sure that they also have access to the different, retailers, ask them about their sourcing, their suppliers, how many of your suppliers are diverse? I think that's a fair question to ask. I will say, for a time, USDA did have certain set aside and preferences in certain programs, and they still do via statute, but there is some tension because last year there was a rule passed that USDA, not passed, but implemented that would get away from some of those preferences, right? Because it was in this context of DEI.
Don't get
and
me
so,
started.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, it's unfortunate because the thing that USDA did to, atone and address, some of the disparities that had historically existed, they would set aside, let's say 5%, of certain credit programs or microloans and say, these, at least 5% needs to go to farmers that are underserved, which basically meant minority farmers or, women farmers, to address the things that have happened. And now you have a situation, people are like, oh, that's discriminatory because you are, singling out, a sex or a gender, or you're singling out, a certain race. And it's unfortunate because we were making progress to, address some of these inequities. And there's also been a lawsuit. Like USDA had, several lawsuits. One was Pickford v. Glickman to address Black farmers and the things that they dealt with. There was also the Keep Seeking one to deal with Native Americans. And there's also one Hispanic. I can't remember the name right now. But USDA has acknowledged, and, people have gone to court and won. And because there has been records of discrimination, and unfortunately, even though those cases, the litigants were successful, a lump sum payment does not make up for a loss of generational wealth, right? It does not make up for a loss of land, but it's something.
Yeah.
And just when we seem like we are making progress, now people are, being pushed back, it's like one step forward, 5 steps back.
Yeah.
So I think we really need to think about how can we be more thoughtful on the consumer level?
Yeah.
How can we be more thoughtful from a grassroots perspective to make sure that we're supporting our farmers, especially at a time where it seems like so many efforts are being taken to, reverse some of the positive things that have been done to make sure that, farmers can catch up.
And I feel like that is so important, especially right now, like, because what we're finding with some of the larger corporate farms is that in today's age where there has been consistent reductions in regulations, corporate farms are cutting corners. Like, let's really be honest. Like, all of these recalls that we're having are as a direct result, are a direct result of carelessness in mostly largely corporate farms, right? And so how can we be thoughtful and organize more, intentionally at the local level around where we're spending our money, right? Because all of these things, some things, right, are beyond our control,
Sure.
but also there are things that we have power over. And sometimes, child, them farmers markets be having some deals.
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Yes, they do. I mean, and the other thing too is like I had an issue where I felt like I was getting these really bad allergies. And I remember someone said the best way, and this is why I got the honey, they said the best way to deal with, allergies, like they're seasonal from the area, is to get the honey that's produced from your area, right? Because the bees and whatnot, they're pollinating, the trees. And so it helps you become a little bit more, I guess, to reduce your allergen level, because
your
now,
susceptibility.
Exactly. And
that's good.
Because
let me take notes, because my allergies.
Yes, right. So that's another reason why, people should be more thoughtful and think about, where their stuff is coming from. And then too, nowadays, so many restaurants, they proudly display oh, I got this from this farm and this from that farm. I'm not trying to shout out all these different businesses, but I go to the Silver Diner, and the Silver Diner, they put where they've sourced their, different things. This is where we got our beef today. This is where we got our lettuce. They put it up there. And I think that, we should also think about how can we support, businesses that are doing that, right?
Yeah.
So that we can let them know, we appreciate you supporting these local farms, and yes, do more of it, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing that we also need to recognize, and I know this is a really tough conversation, especially in today's times, in terms of the economy, is that the price point is going to be a little different, right? These smaller farmers, they're not making that much money.
Yeah.
Farmers in general, right, are not really making as much money as people may think they are, particularly though with the smaller farmers. And so when they bring this stuff to market, the margins might be a little bit thinner than we expect. And so, especially with the tariffs and, kind of the trade situation that we have right now. So do know, you might be paying 30 cents more, for, that produce. So you might pay a little bit more, for, that particular fruit. And that comes with supporting, a local business. A business that is larger, they can produce at scale, right? So their operating costs is going to be a little bit different, and they can give you that discount. Whereas that smaller farmer, the margins are a little bit tighter. So, sometimes I think we get into this habit of, we want to have these things, but we also don't want to pay people for it. And it's I don't know about that.
The cheapest possible option, which again goes back to it's understandable with current market, but then also it's being thoughtful about even how can we pool resources within community, right? How can we think creatively about best leveraging our resources to keep our communities well fed with the most equitable resources possible, right? Because also it's you get the cheaper lettuce, and we know what the cheap lettuce does.
Right.
We've seen the fallout from cheap lettuce, cheap blueberries.
So we have to make some decisions.
Yes.
Right? This is, everything kind of comes with, you need to be thoughtful about it, right? You are going to pay less, but why are you paying less, right? I'm going to pay more. Why am I paying more, right? It's the same concept with clothes sometimes. I could buy something for $7, but how many wears am I going to get that item versus if I spent maybe $15?
Yeah.
So it's the same concept. You get what you pay for at times.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can, you can short something. Other times it's well, if I want this quality produce.
Yeah. You might have to pay quality produce prices. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Joe said it, today's price, not yesterday's price.
Look. The price thing gone up. The price thing gone up. Okay, so moving forward, you are a co-founder of Black Professionals in Food and Agriculture. Yeah. Some of our listeners may also not be familiar with the organization, so please tell us about it and how that came to be.
One of my proudest moments, to be honest. So, a couple of my colleagues and I, we decided to create this organization because we want a community, right? Now I will say this. If you ask, there was 6 of us. if you ask each one why we created this organization,
The
you
answer
might get
gonna
different
change.
answers.
That's
Yes.
okay. That's good.
Okay, so, but this is Kelly. So, we want a community. And so we all worked in policy. And again, we realized there weren't a lot of people that looked like us. We would hear about job opportunities, and we really would try to be thoughtful of like, hey, I heard about this job. Would you be interested? And they're like, oh, I heard about this too. I was going to contact you. We're like, okay, we got to get out this bubble, right? Like there are more people in here. We got to be able to, reach the masses. We want to make sure too that we're building a pipeline, right? Like it can't just be us. I don't ever want to be a gatekeeper on anything. If I'm working on something, if I have, I have access to something, if you're trying to get on the hill and you have questions about it, I'm not going to be that person that's like, ooh, I'm not going to tell you no. I want all of us to come, right? Lift as we climb. And so for me, it was very important to have an organization that could build a pipeline of the next generation of food and ag, minds in this space. And also I wanted to make sure too that when we had opportunities to speak on panels, to participate in different conversations, it wasn't just the same faces, right? It was very important, to me to make sure people knew like, okay, I know somebody that looks a little bit different than the folks you normally have, right?
Yes.
So I don't want you to use an excuse like, well, I didn't know anyone. I do. Right. And so we formed this organization 6 years ago during the pandemic. And one of the first things that we did is we crowdsourced resumes. We said, okay, who do we know that's working in this area? Because this is when Biden was coming into office.
Yeah.
And many of us at the organization, and the co-founders, half of us actually at that time had already worked at USDA.
Yeah.
And so we said, okay, well, we want to make sure that more of us work at USDA. So we crowdsourced.
Oh, this is good.
Yes. We were like, all right.
It's giving very Underground Railroad.
It's very much. It was a whole little thing. So we got about, let's say, 20 resumes of people that said, oh, yes, I would like to be, considered for an opportunity at USDA. So then we sent those resumes over there. But we didn't just send them over there as us as individuals. We worked within our, network. Many of us had worked for members of the Congressional Black Caucus. And so I worked for, I mentioned Marsha Fudge at one point. We had people who worked for other members. And we said, hey, it'd be great if you can send these resumes over to USDA so that they can get considered for job opportunities. And what ended up happening was half of those people got interviewed and many of them got, those jobs. And
that's
we also
power.
had, like, Dr. Joe Bernal was the deputy secretary at USDA. And so,
that's
we
power.
really, created the organization kind of just like, all right, let's just see what we can do. And now it's grown, and we have annual events during the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's annual legislative conference. That's a mouthful. But, now we have events there. We do, happy hours. We do seminars, and webinars. We've had, USDA officials participate, and it's just grown leaps and bounds. And it all started from, we just want to be around people that look like us and help one another out. And now here we are today. So, yeah,
I have so much to say. My brain is like, okay, so to the start, my first question is, so if I asked one of the other 6 members, what are the other answers? Or, if I asked the other 5, what other responses might I get for you all's origin story?
I think they'll probably say something similar, but one might say networking. Another one might say, I really wanted to build a community and go beyond just policy, right? We want to capture people outside the DC bubble because we did. We created a LinkedIn page and it was so much interest. We had no idea that so many people would be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a part of that. What is that?
That's good.
So they might say that. Others might say, oh, this was a job, kind of opportunity, right? Like this is something that I thought we could do to create jobs. Or they might say, this is something that we created to create influence, right? So that we can, have a voice in policy so that the next farm bill comes up, or when you have some, big policy conversation, we have a seat at the table. So I think they would all be similar, kind of related,
but just nuanced.
But very, nuanced
difference. I was like, is somebody gonna be like, I just wanted to get together with people in my field for cocktails?
No one will say that, but we do enjoy getting together. Okay, we do have a good time together, but I don't think they would say that.
Okay, so that was my first thought. The second thought that I had was just like wanting to commend you, because when you talk about your origin story and you name that like someone stood in the doorway for you, to then stand in the doorway for others, and not only like I think of the image of like someone stands in the doorway and then the next generation busts it wide open. Like literally like, okay, we all coming in here. It's no fun if the homies can't come. Like we're all, I got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11 friends who also might be interested in the opportunity. And like that is the energy that we need right now. Like we're in a time in society where we are desperately in need of movement builders who move before they even see the full picture, right? And that's not to say that maybe you all didn't, you all had a great conception, but even you said y'all didn't know where it was going to go exactly. Y'all didn't realize the level of response that you would receive. But you never know until you take the first step, right? And by creating that opportunity, by opening the door and the gateway to say like, hey, y'all interested? Like that is the opportunity that someone needed to maybe stand more firmly in that. So that was my second thing, is just wanting to commend you and your co-founders that like, that is so necessary, and it's so important even when we talk about like intergenerational development, which is also something that I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about a lot of things.
Yeah, that's good.
But which is also something that I'm incredibly passionate about, because we so often hear these intergenerational narratives that are negative, right? These intergenerational narratives, either from younger folks saying that like, well, the older folks, they don't want us to have no opportunity, and nobody understands, and they're stuck in their old ways. Or you have the narrative from older generations about those who will come after them, like, man, there's no hope. There's no hope, and don't nobody want to work anymore. And I remember when I was 15 and I had to trudge through the snow with no socks on in order to get to the whole shebang. Right? And so it's so important, not that either perspectives can feel valid, but the opportunity to sit in space is often what makes the difference. And that's when we talk about any demographic divide, right? Realistically, the greatest barrier that stands between you and understanding with someone who differs from you is just the equal capacity and mutual ability to sit in space with one another and see what's up.
You know what? So I'm sitting here just like, wow, I'm just so impressed by you. Just kind of like how you frame things and how you are able to weave together like different kind of points and just bring it home. Because the other thing too is I feel like you were in my mind, because I literally just had a similar conversation yesterday about BPFA. And so when we...
What's BPFA?
Oh, sorry. Black Professionals in Food and Agriculture. Sorry, I'm just using acronyms. But now everyone else going to know. BPFA. So I was talking about this yesterday because when we formed the organization, I was the first president of the organization, and we had a board of directors. We did bylaws. We registered. Like, we were very serious.
Very serious.
We took this thing, and we talked to other organizations that were similar, and they commended us on like, wow, you guys have really moved, forward. We created a website. Like, we were doing all the things, right? I probably pushed a little bit too much at times, and my colleagues probably got a little tired of me. But look where we are today. But I was the first president, and I was also on the board of directors. And in our bylaws, we wrote it in such a way that at some point, people roll off. And so I volunteered to be one of the first people that rolled off the board. And people that know me, they know I like to organize. I'm used to being in control and being a leader. But what I also am very much about is giving other people opportunities and space to lead as well. And so when it came time for me to move on, I did that willingly. And, before I did it, though, I made sure that, we recruited some people to take over. And when I look at where they brought the organization, I'm just so proud of them, right? Like, I don't know if I could have done what they've done. I think very highly of my abilities, but I must acknowledge the fact that they have really done a good job of where we are today. And as you said earlier, reflecting on what I said, I had no idea, and I'm sure the other folks probably feel similarly. that the organization would grow like it did.
Yeah.
And now we just shifted leadership again because we have a process, right? We have elections. Like, we want to make sure that this is not something where people feel like, they're going to be doing this for life. Like, no, people get the opportunity to lead.
To shape the work differently.
To shape the work differently, because you might have a different perspective. Now, the one thing we do is that we're not going to leave you.
Yeah.
Like, we'll be here.
Yes.
We'll be in the background, but in the background. We're not going to be those people who is like telling you or trying to be like, oh, what you should do, such and such. No, like, you have been called to lead. We're going to support you as best as we can. And I think that's the beauty of the organization. And what I really, am so proud of is that we built an organization that can sustain itself, that it doesn't drop when one of us leaves. Like, it continues on. The work carries on, and people are still carrying out the mission. So that's the part that I'm most proud of when it comes to the organization.
Because, child, when you talk about sustainability, one of the greatest killers of sustainability is a one-woman show.
Right.
Or a one-man show. Because at some point, the only sure thing is death, okay? And at some point, whether it be... Whoa.
Well, look, maybe not even taxes nowadays. Touche.
Depends on who you're talking to. Okay. But what happens is inevitably at some point you have to roll. And what I appreciate, right, is, again, in talking about intergenerational mutual benefit, right, mutual exchange, right, this understanding that there is something that all generations have to offer, which is why we must all operate in concert with one another, is the fact that, like, as an elder or, as someone...
I'm on auntie status. I'm on auntie status.
I'm like, not to call you an elder, but as one of our elders, right, the importance of that, like, to be clear, that's an honor in many societies, right? But that opportunity then, after you have done your handiwork, now you have the opportunity to do the wisdom work. Yeah. And that, you know what, write it down. She just was like, and that is a work of itself, right? Like, that is not independent. And so I just so appreciate the culture that you all clearly are building amongst yourself, right? That it has great intention, and that shows. But I have more questions, so let me try to keep moving forward, okay? Adequate staffing at USD offices. Speaking of the USDA.
Oh, love USDA.
Adequate staffing at USDA offices and local service centers don't always make headlines, but it's critical for farmers trying to navigate federal programs. Why does staffing matter so much, and what happens when those offices are understaffed or absent in historically underserved communities?
Ooh, I mean, you feel that impact right away. I mean, those local offices, they do so much. They could be a lifeline in some of these communities. They're there to do outreach, technical assistance, so they help the farmers understand. There's different programs that are coming down from USDA, whether it's now they created some new initiative around, I don't know, let's say they created an initiative around regenerative agriculture or something like that. Or, they've updated a program. Like, the way that the farmers hear about that on the ground is from their local offices, right? They go to their farm service agency, they can get that information. So if there is not adequate staffing, then that means that they are maybe missing out on receiving that information, understanding it. Sometimes these programs, I mean, the paperwork can be a little challenging, right? And so having someone to be able to walk you through is very helpful, and let you know, okay, you are eligible for this, or have you thought about this particular program? And then two, they can help you out with your farm in general. Have you tried, this, did you test this out on your soil? Like, what about, X, Y, and Z? So you really see that, kind of drop off. And again, it really, impacts those smaller farmers who rely so heavily, on those local offices. The other thing is those local offices, they are the go-between. And so, if you have administrative backlogs, let's say you have now applied for a program. If you don't have adequate staffing, when do you get that credit loan approved? It might be a while. Or when does that payment disbursement come out, right? I need my money.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you have a situation where now you're reducing staff, it just has this trickle down effect. And typically that trickle down effect is never going to be positive. It's something that's going to be negative. So you definitely feel that. And it's really important to have the appropriate staff there to help people out with these programs. programs.
You really learned me something, because I really thought the USDA was just a stamp.
Yeah.
Me.
No.
USDA certified. I really appreciate
USDA is huge.
Yes.
I don't know where we are now, but when you think about the various departments that we have, USDA, besides I think it's called Department of War now. Sorry, y'all. I shouldn't have rolled my eyes.
Let me unroll.
Let me unroll. Please, thank you. But that was the largest department in terms of employees. But USDA is right up there, right? And it's because you have so many local employees as well. So with the Farm Service Agency, with NRCS, the Natural Resources and Conservation Services, RMA, Risk Management Agency. So you have all these different agencies. And so at one point in time, you might have had 100,000 employees at USDA. Wow. I think now, because of DOGE, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but DOGE was the outfit that came on board when Trump first got in office. That was, I think it's Department of Government Efficiency. They were charged with kind of finding inefficiencies in the government and, making suggestions about what to cut and, things of that nature. And there was a significant drop in the federal employees across the board. So I'm not sure where USDA employees stand now, but it's a very, very large department. And so people don't fully appreciate all the things that fall under USDA's belt. I mentioned energy earlier, but you also have housing, right? Rural housing falls under USDA. You have school meals that fall under USDA, SNAP. It's so much trade, some trade issues and some, foreign ag stuff. So it's a really, really big department. Lots of money, and that's why it's so important to have the staff that can talk to the people on the ground to let them know all the things that they might be eligible for.
Yeah, and this is why it is important to build greater community understanding of the ever-changing government ecosystem, right? I'm thinking back to the days, particularly in the early days of Black people having the right to vote, right? When they were teaching classes of okay, this is the government, and these are the branches, and this is how they operate, and these are all of the, these are the local officials, and this is what local officials do. And I think some of those things became or seemed to become unnecessary over time. But man, bring back locally taught and facilitated government classes, right? Because as we know, the traditional education system ain't cutting it. Okay? The traditional education system edits their history books at this point, has long time edited. But it's so incredibly important to build greater at-large understanding of the interconnectedness of all of these systems, because again, and I've spoken about this several times on the show previously, everything fits together from a public health perspective, right? So how farming is connected to housing, is connected to health insurance, is connected to environment, is connected to, taxes, is connected to, recreation, is connected to life, the quality of life, is connected to the cost of living, right? How all of these things fit together, and how currently our political landscape is in so many ways coloring the lens through which we perceive these things and the clarity by which we can understand these systems, right? Because of just the great amount of information that is flowing at us on an ongoing basis, right? And so I just really appreciate how in this conversation you have supported greater understanding from an environmental perspective of really how food and farming and some of the changes that have been made at the federal level to these systems that operate under those umbrellas, how those things impact our everyday lives, right? Sure. Putting in a way that I don't know that we have done, at least in my time hosting the show, really putting the focus at the forefront on our farmers and our farming industries. I know we've talked about nutrition, but it's like behind nutrition, right? Underneath nutrition. And these things coexist. Not that one can come without the other. It's like the chicken and the egg, the cart and the horse and all of the things. But understanding that these things do have a symbiotic relationship, right? And there's so much necessity. You said earlier in the conversation that there has been a breakdown in the relationship. And there's been a breakdown, frankly, in so many symbiotic relationships across government, across society. There are so many conversations of reform and in some ways healing that need to happen in order for communities to get back on the same page about the priorities that are of utmost importance, right? But a part of that also comes with what you've discussed today, which is finding your pocket. Where you fit in, like seeing and noticing, like, hey, this is interesting. Maybe you were voluntold to sit on a committee, right? Maybe you were told in your case, like, hey, you're smart. Here's an issue. Get to it.
Yes.
Okay. But it's being able to then identify there's a gap here, right? And being willing to be the first or one of the first to fill that, right? And doing it afraid, right? And doing it maybe without all of the answers figured out, right? Like all of these things are so incredibly important. And I'm so excited. I have so many questions that I know we're not going to get to, but I'm going to fast forward a little bit because you mentioned regenerative agriculture and regenerative this word gonna eat me up, and I just knew that this word was going to eat me up.
So it's fine. I'm
Regenerative, okay? Agriculture has become a major topic in conversations about climate resilience, soil health, and the future of farming. From your perspective, what opportunities does regenerative agriculture create for Black farmers, and what barriers might prevent historically underserved communities from accessing the funding, technical assistance, or land security needed to implement these practices? I know that's a big one. Before you unpack it, I would love for you to give listeners another like high level, what do we mean when we say regenerative agriculture?
Now, here's the thing. If I could define that, I would be rich. Because that's the thing about regenerative agriculture. I mean, it has been one of these terms or phrases that's been kind of like, not to say tossed around, but used in a way where it can kind of be whatever you want it to be. It's kind of like I remember I had a boss and one time she said something about someone and she was like, yeah, that was stupid. And I was like, hey, how about we not say stupid? Let's say interesting.
Yeah.
And she said, but what does that mean? I said, give me whatever you want it to, you know?
Exactly.
She was like, I don't know if I like that. I was like, that's the point, right? Depends on what the listener, you know, how they perceive it. So regenerative agriculture is kind of similar in a way because it's a phrase that, you know, typically can, you know, relate to a number of things. It could, you know, talk about cover crops, right? When you do cover crops, you are planting something in between your, you know, actual like main crop so that you can keep some of the nitrogen in the soil. It could be, you know, maybe you are not, you know, tilling the land, so you're not going over and doing multiple passes. It could be, you know, something like, you know, you found some innovative way to do something with your soil. So it kind of can be a number of different things, but it's the wave, as the young kids would say. I can't believe I even said that. But, you know, it's definitely one of those things where people are talking about it a lot because you also have it with this administration, quite honestly, they have taken a big interest in regenerative agriculture, mainly on the side of we want to make sure that we are promoting, you know, more local, you know, farms, and we want to really make sure that we are putting forward different ways that, you know, these farmers can be engaged, you know, on the ground level. We want to, because it's not so much the climate. The climate piece still can be a little partisan at times, depending on who you talk to. But from the sense of like, we are promoting local foods, that's kind of like how this administration has really leaned in when it comes to regenerative agriculture. So there's a lot of opportunity to be had. So I think right now, this could be something that Black farmers can, you know, kind of take advantage of because there are programs, the last administration, under the Biden administration, they did something like climate smart partnerships. And this administration, they call it regenerative ag, something, something. Same concept, just a different name. So that happens, in politics, different
You want to
administration
call it
comes
something
on.
new.
Yeah, like we don't like that name.
Yeah,
It gets rebranded, but the goal is similar. And so there is a lot of, positive energy about regen ag. The concerns for Black farmers, even though there's a lot of like excitement about it, there may be some challenges because with now, as I mentioned earlier, you had a decline in Black ownership, farm ownership. So with some of the Black farmers, they may be leasing their land. And if they're leasing the land, if they want to get involved in some of these regenerative ag practices, they need to make sure that their landlord is okay with it. And a landlord may be okay if the practice is still making sure that the yields are where they need to be. But if the yields of whatever crop that they're growing, starts to diminish, a landlord may not be with that, right? They may say, okay, that's nice and all, but I need you to focus on the main thing. Or, maybe some Black farmers with some of these programs, it may take some type of investment. Do they have that extra cash on hand? Are they able to, access the capital that they need to get into the game? And so there's still the issues around capital, credit, there's still issues around, do they have the capacity to do this? Are they willing to kind of maybe do something innovative with their soil? Maybe, but they also might be hesitant because they may say, I don't really have that flexibility to be as creative as I might, want to be because I need to focus on the harvest this year. So, there definitely is a lot of opportunity, but there still may be some challenges depending on, the financial status and kind of just the resources that farmer may have.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
And I would say this too. There are some companies that will pay farmers for some regenerative ag practices, but in that instance, it's a matter of knowing, that those companies are doing that. So again, it goes back to outreach and technical assistance too.
And having the availability and the access to be able to provide that support and intermediary. Okay. Again, I have just so many questions, and we just got so into conversation, and I'm so glad about that. Okay, but just like that, it's time for us to prepare for the end of another. I know
that was quick.
I know. Okay. That's what I'm saying. It's so many lists of questions. But so what I'm going to ask, I'm going to do a little remix because there were several things that I wasn't able to cover. So usually when we come to the end of an episode, we always like to ask our guests if there's anything that you want to share with the audience to keep them uplifted, anything particularly that you wanted to make sure they hear, which I always say, I hope they heard everything, y'all, okay? Dropping gems. But for you, in addition to sharing, I would love for you to share like a final thought, a summarizing thought that you have about kind of our conversation today. But I'm also interested, like, if there's anything specifically that you want to talk about as it relates, because it is a midterm election year, right? And so when we talk about the intersection of like nutrition assistance, SNAP funding, voting rights, agricultural policy, like how all of those fit together and meeting this current moment, is there any encouragement that you can offer our audience as it relates to that?
Yeah, I would say, to that point, the four things that you just listed, I think on its face, some people would say, oh, those sound like urban issues. They're not. They're American issues because, right now the Farm Bill has not been passed largely because, there was a significant cut to SNAP. And, part of it is now with this reconciliation bill that was passed, states will for the first time need to cover a portion of SNAP benefits. Currently, SNAP benefits are paid fully by the federal government. Now states will need to pay a portion of that if their payment error rate is a certain percent. So I don't need to go into the details on that. But the point there is that states already have very constrained budgets. Now you're putting this on states to take on this new responsibility. And what happens if a state can't take it on, right? People probably only know that this stuff is happening. So like they need to be aware because when you think about SNAP, it's not just an urban program. There's a high level of SNAP participation in rural America. And so, that also is included in the Farm Bill. Farm Bill hasn't been reauthorized largely because, the two sides can't come to terms of agreement of how do we address this big SNAP thing at the same time? How do we get assistance to our farmers? It doesn't need to be one for the other.
Yeah.
But that's how it's been taken. You think about voting rights, like, you know, when you are decimating the power of people based off of political wins, like WINS, like WINDS, it can flow back in the opposite direction, right?
Yeah.
Now you're up. 2-3 years from now, you can be
might be
down, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, we need to be paying attention to how all of this kind of goes together, because there are significant decisions that are being made, right? And we don't want to get into a situation where we're going tit for tat, because it takes such a long time for these things to unwind.
And then we're just on the pendulum.
On the pendulum. And so I think, you know, to sum things up, you know, I would say, look at the Farm Bill, right? For so many of the people that are listening today, really think about that Farm Bill. There's so much in it. People have no idea whether it's you know, look into it because there may be something that can be a benefit to you, or look into it so you can understand how something impacts you. You know, I talked about the SNAP funding and what states might do. Let's say if the states can't afford to pay these benefits, they might increase your income tax, right? So it's like you need to be cognizant of the world around you and try not to look at any issue just on its face. Really be thoughtful about how do these things intersect together. Ask yourself that question. As you're looking at these things, you might think they're disjointed, but really be thoughtful about what is it that these things have in common. Why should I care? And then make sure too that you're doing your job and learning, and hopefully help somebody else to learn too, because that's what it's really all is about, right? We're not supposed to live like, you know, kind of just like as if individuals. It's best to live in community. So like, you know, the whole each one teach one is really important. So we all need to do a better job of just making sure that we're informed.
That's so good. Well, thank you, Kelly, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us for episode 8. Thank you all so much for being here for another great episode of The Green Agenda. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you right here next month. Bye.